No one could silence the billionaire's baby, not his money, his staff, or his tech. But when a teenage girl with a ragged sketchbook whispered, "Let me try," the entire cabin froze. What she did next would silence a crying child and awaken a man's buried humanity. Billionaire Alexander Monroe slumped in seat 1A of his gleaming private jet, every trace of composure stripped from his face. In his arms, Lila, his 1-year-old daughter, screamed so loudly it felt like the sound could tear through metal. The plane cut across the Atlantic toward Dubai, but inside that cabin time had stopped. Every minute stretched by the echo of a baby's cry that no amount of money could quiet. He'd tried everything: warm milk, white noise playlists, even a lullaby app engineered by one of his own companies. None of it worked. The flight attendants, polished and patient, exchanged nervous glances as they offered suggestions that failed one after another. Alexander's reputation as the man who solved the unsolvable meant nothing now. His child was inconsolable, and every cry jabbed at a part of him he didn't know existed. The passengers in first class tried to pretend not to stare. A social media influencer across the aisle began recording discreetly. Another passenger muttered that children didn't belong on luxury flights. Alexander caught a reflection of himself in the cabin window, an empire builder undone by a 6-kilogram storm of tears. He'd closed billion-dollar deals, negotiated mergers that changed industries, yet here he was, whispering pleas to a baby who couldn't understand a single word. Then, just as his patience cracked into despair, something quietly extraordinary happened. A voice, soft but steady, drifted from behind the curtain separating first class from economy. "Excuse me, sir," it said. "May I try something? I think I can help her." Every head turned. Standing near the aisle was a teenage black girl, maybe 17, clutching a worn sketchbook to her chest. Her clothes were simple, her backpack patched with colored thread, but her eyes held a calm focus that cut through the noise. Alexander blinked, too exhausted to object. "Go ahead," he managed. "If you can make her stop crying, I'll give you anything you want." She shook her head gently. "I don't want anything. Just let me try." The girl, Ava Brooks, though he didn't know her name yet, tore a sheet from her sketchbook and began folding. Her fingers moved with deliberate rhythm: crease, turn, fold. A faint hum followed, something between a lullaby and a gospel refrain. Within moments, the paper had become a fluttering bird. She made it dance in slow, hypnotic arcs before Lila's tear-streaked face. The impossible happened. The wailing ebbed into hiccups, then quiet. A hush rolled through the cabin. Lila's eyes tracked the paper bird, wide and fascinated, until her tiny laugh broke the silence. Alexander's breath caught. He stared at the girl who had done what professionals, gadgets, and flight attendants could not. "Who are you?" he asked. "Just someone who learned a few tricks to calm her brother," Ava said softly. "He has sensory issues. Color and movement help him feel safe." For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. He simply watched as his daughter reached for the fragile bird, her giggle rippling through the air like forgiveness. The billionaire who built machines to mimic human intelligence realized he was witnessing something no algorithm could replicate: pure empathy. What neither of them knew was that this moment at 35,000 feet would bind their fates together, leading to choices that would test the meaning of privilege, purpose, and love. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The steady hum of the plane should have been comforting, but to Ava Brooks, it sounded like the anxious buzz of possibility. Her sketchbook rested on her knees, its cover worn soft from years of use. Each page inside was filled with color, bursts of imagination, scraps of dreams and pieces of the life she wanted to build beyond the cracked sidewalks of her Atlanta neighborhood. 17 years old, with an artist's heart and a realist's backbone, Ava was heading to Dubai to represent the United States at the Youth Art for Change Expo. It wasn't just a competition, it was a chance. The kind of chance kids like her didn't get twice. The winner would receive a full international scholarship, mentorship from global artists, and a platform big enough to amplify voices often silenced by circumstance. The flight had been booked with miracle money. Her community, neighbors, her church, even the little corner store owner who'd known her since she was small, had rallied to send her across the ocean. They'd baked pies, hosted raffles, sold secondhand clothes, and whispered prayers into envelopes that carried crumpled bills and love. Ava had promised all of them she'd make their sacrifice worth it. Now, thousands of feet above the Atlantic, she traced lazy lines across her page, sketching the outline of a mother and child. The drawing wasn't planned. Her hands moved on instinct. The baby in her picture was small, head resting against its mother's chest, eyes wide with wonder. Then a cry pierced through the cabin, shrill, pained, endless. Ava flinched, her pencil jerking across the paper. The sound carried through the air like a wire pulled tight. She looked up to see the source, a man in a designer suit pacing in first class, rocking a screaming baby in his arms. Even from where she sat, Ava could see the panic in his eyes. The billionaire. She recognized him immediately. Alexander Monroe, the face that had appeared on business magazines her art teacher used to read, the man whose technology reshaped modern life. He looked nothing like his photos now. His shirt was creased, his expression desperate. The baby's cries echoed louder than the jet engines. Ava swallowed hard. She shouldn't stare, but she couldn't help it, because that sound, those high, aching cries, tore open a place inside her she had tried to keep closed. It was Malik's sound. Her little brother's cries used to fill their apartment late into the night when he was a toddler. Doctors had called it sensory processing disorder. Too much light, too much sound, too many sensations. His body couldn't handle them. Their mother worked double shifts, and sometimes Ava had to hold him for hours, whispering lullabies until her arms went numb. Nothing worked until she discovered something by accident: color and rhythm. She'd folded bits of paper into birds and flowers, colored them with markers, and moved them slowly before Malik's eyes while humming songs from church. The patterns calmed him. The rhythm grounded him. He'd watch, mesmerized, until his sobs turned to hiccups and finally, to sleep. Now, miles above the clouds, that same helplessness crept back into her chest. She watched Alexander Monroe bounce his crying daughter with the same frustration she once felt as a child trying to soothe her brother. Only this time, she wasn't sure if she had the right to help. What would people think? A poor black girl walking up to a billionaire? The thought made her stomach twist. The flight attendants might stop her, the passengers might laugh. She could already hear the whispers. She should mind her business. But the baby's cry cut through her doubts like a plea. Ava closed her sketchbook, pressing her palm against its worn cover as if gathering courage from every drawing inside. She looked again at the man, saw the exhaustion in his eyes, and felt the ache of a memory she couldn't ignore. Maybe kindness is art, too, she whispered under her breath. Before she could talk herself out of it, Ava stood up, sketchbook in hand, heart pounding harder than the engines outside. She took one slow, steady step toward the front of the plane, guided not by confidence, but by compassion too strong to sit still. The aisle stretched before Ava like a narrow bridge between two worlds, one where people worked for every breath, and another where power floated in champagne glasses and soft leather seats. She hesitated at the curtain dividing economy from first class, her heart thudding like a drum she couldn't silence. The baby's cries grew sharper. Every sob felt like a plea. Ava tightened her grip on her sketchbook and whispered to herself, Just help her. As she stepped forward, a flight attendant blocked her path. The woman's polite smile was a mask for suspicion. "Excuse me, miss. First class is restricted. Can I ask where you're headed?" Ava swallowed. I think I can help the baby." The attendant blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "I appreciate that, but the situation is under control." "No, it's not," Ava said before she could stop herself. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "She's overwhelmed, I can tell. Please, just let me try." The attendant's eyes softened with pity but shook her head. "Sweetheart, that's a billionaire's child up there. He doesn't need—" "Help from someone like me?" Ava finished quietly. Before the attendant could respond, a rough, exhausted voice interrupted. "Let her through." Ava turned. Alexander Monroe stood in the aisle, his once perfect hair disheveled, his designer shirt wrinkled and marked with faint stains from spilled milk. Lila's screams still tore through the cabin as he rocked her helplessly, the picture of a man stripped bare of every ounce of control. He studied Ava with weary eyes, too drained to care about appearances or social barriers. "You said you can help her?" Ava nodded. "I think so, sir." He exhaled, a sound between relief and surrender. "Go ahead. If you can make her stop crying, I'll give you anything you want." "I don't want anything," Ava said softly. "Just a chance." The flight attendants stepped aside. The murmuring passengers fell silent, curiosity overpowering their judgment. Ava approached slowly, the hum of the plane seeming to fade under the pulse of her heart. She tore a blank sheet from her sketchbook, her fingers steady now that she had purpose. Fold, press, turn. The paper took shape beneath her touch, first a wing, then another. A butterfly emerged, simple yet alive in its own fragile way. Ava began to hum, a quiet gospel tune her grandmother used to sing on humid Sunday mornings. The melody floated through the air, soft and warm, wrapping the sound of the baby's cries like a lullaby made of light. Lila's wails faltered. Her tiny chest heaved once, twice, then stilled. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The baby's wide eyes fixed on the fluttering paper butterfly as Ava moved it in slow, rhythmic arcs. The silence that followed was unreal. Even the engines seemed muted. Then, soft laughter. Lila giggled, reaching for the paper wings, her fingers curling around the edges as if she'd captured joy itself. Alexander's mouth parted in disbelief. His shoulders sagged, the tension draining from him all at once. Around them, passengers exchanged astonished glances. A few even clapped quietly, unable to contain the relief that rippled through the cabin. Ava smiled, though her hands still trembled. "She's beautiful when she laughs," she whispered. Alexander looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a stranger, not as a girl from economy, but as something rare and steady. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice hushed with awe. Ava met his gaze. "I learned how to see the world the way children who feel too much do," she said simply. "Sometimes it's not about stopping the noise, it's about finding the rhythm inside it." For a long, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Lila cooed softly between them, bridging the distance that wealth, status, and fear had built. In that quiet space above the clouds, a billionaire and a girl with a sketchbook shared something wordless but profound, an understanding that compassion could cross any divide. And though neither of them knew it yet, this fragile piece was the beginning of a connection that would change both their lives forever. The cabin had grown quiet, filled only with the soft rhythm of the jet and the gentle breathing of a sleeping child. Lila rested peacefully in Ava's arms, her tiny fingers tangled in a lock of Ava's curls, as if afraid to let go. Every now and then, she'd sigh contentedly, and the sound made Alexander's heart ache in ways he hadn't felt for a long time. For the first time since takeoff, Alexander could think clearly. He sat across from Ava, watching as she adjusted Lila's blanket with the kind of tenderness he couldn't manufacture no matter how hard he tried. The girl's calm energy seemed to have filled the entire cabin, displacing the chaos that had ruled just an hour earlier. "She really likes you," he said finally, his voice still hoarse from exhaustion. Ava smiled faintly. "Most babies do when they're not scared. It's all about making the world around them feel safe." Her words settled on him like truth. He leaned back, studying her more carefully now. The frayed edges of her sweater, the taped spine of her sketchbook, the steady confidence in her posture. "You said your brother has sensory issues?" Ava nodded. "Malik, he's 8 now. When he was little, he used to cry for hours. The doctor said his brain just processes the world differently. Too many sounds, too many lights. I couldn't fix that, so I started drawing things that made him calm. Patterns, colors, movements that helped him focus. That's how I got into art." Alexander listened, quiet and intent. There was no pity in his expression, only respect. "So your art, it's more than just pictures?" "It's therapy," she said softly. "I'm trying to build a program someday, a place where kids like Malik can learn through art, rhythm, and touch, where parents don't have to feel helpless." He was silent for a long moment, the hum of the engines filling the space between them. When he finally spoke, his tone was different, gentler, thoughtful. "You know, I used to think technology could fix anything, but it can't do what you just did in this cabin." Ava looked down, embarrassed. "You don't have to say that, sir. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just didn't want her to cry." Alexander's gaze lingered on Lila's peaceful face, then on Ava. "You're an artist who heals people," he said quietly, "and I want to help you reach the world." Her eyes widened. "Sir, I can't accept money from you. It would feel wrong. I wasn't doing this for anything in return." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "It's not charity, Ava. You didn't just calm my daughter. You reminded me what humanity looks like. Somewhere along the line, I forgot what that felt like." Outside the window, the first streaks of dawn touched the horizon, painting the clouds in gold. Lila stirred in Ava's arms, then settled again. As the plane began its descent into Dubai, Alexander Monroe, the man who had built machines to change the world, realized that the most powerful creation he'd witnessed wasn't made of steel or code. It was made of paper, compassion, and a girl who believed art could heal pain. The air in Dubai shimmered with heat and ambition. Glass towers stretched into a sky so blue it looked unreal. And the scent of newness clung to every corner. Luxury malls, mirrored skyscrapers, spotless roads. It was a city built to impress, to prove that the impossible could be sculpted from sand. For Alexander Monroe, it was familiar terrain. His company, Monroe Tech, had invested millions into Dubai's digital infrastructure. He was scheduled to deliver a keynote at the Global Tech Summit, an event reserved for the world's elite visionaries. His penthouse suite overlooked the Persian Gulf, marble floors, infinity pools, and assistants who spoke in whispers. It was comfort perfected, but even as he unpacked his tailored suits, the silence felt heavy. A few miles away, in a narrow street behind a crowded art district, Ava Brooks dragged her worn suitcase up 3 flights of stairs to the Dubai Youth Hostel. Her room was small and humid, with 2 bunk beds, a single desk, and a window that offered a crooked view of the skyline. But when she looked out, she smiled. It wasn't luxury, but it was hers. The next morning, Ava entered the Youth Art for Change Expo, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. The exhibition hall looked like a dream. Glass ceilings, neon lights, rows of immaculate displays glowing under spotlights. Young artists from around the world presented installations worth thousands of dollars. Some wore custom-tailored outfits and introduced themselves with the confidence of people who had never been told no. Ava felt like an ink stain on a perfect white canvas. Her supplies fit into a single tote bag. No sponsors, no publicist, no brand name, just paper, fabric, and the belief that art could heal. She set up her small corner booth quietly, arranging her folded paper figures, butterflies, doves, flowers, alongside soft pastel sketches inspired by her brother Malik. Her sign was handwritten, "The language of calm, art for the senses." Across town, Alexander sat through meetings filled with jargon and projections, but his mind wasn't in the boardroom. He kept thinking about Ava's words. It's all about making the world feel safe. That evening, restless, he slipped away from a networking dinner and made his way to the expo. No entourage, no cameras, just curiosity. He found Ava's booth tucked into the far corner, surrounded by brighter, louder installations. Yet hers drew a small, quiet crowd. Parents, children, and a few onlookers who seemed soothed just standing there. She spoke gently, explaining how certain color patterns could relax the brain, how movement and repetition could calm anxiety. Her art wasn't trying to dazzle, it was trying to heal. Alexander stood back, unseen, and felt something stir. Admiration, yes, but also humility. In her fragile creations, he saw more humanity than in all the algorithms his company had ever built. Lila squealed in delight when she spotted Ava later that week. The baby reached for her, laughing uncontrollably, as if she remembered the paper butterfly from the plane. Ava laughed too, spinning her around with practiced ease. Alexander watched from nearby, feeling something he hadn't felt since his wife's death: lightness. That evening, he called her aside. "You didn't mention you didn't have sponsorship," he said gently. Ava looked embarrassed. "I didn't want to ask for help. I can manage." He smiled faintly. "Then consider this anonymous help. No logos, no public announcements, just a friend making sure your message gets seen." She hesitated, pride and gratitude warring inside her. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but only if you promise it's not charity." "Deal," he said, offering his hand. As the city lights flickered across the glass skyline, two unlikely allies, a billionaire haunted by loss and a girl armed with compassion, stood on opposite sides of fortune but within reach of the same truth. Sometimes, what the world needs most isn't progress or profit, it's peace. At first, the whispers came softly, the kind that glide just below the surface of polite smiles. But by the second day of the expo, they had taken shape, curling through the air like smoke. "Did you hear? The billionaire from the plane is backing her work." Of course she's getting all that attention now. Sympathy art sells. She probably staged the whole thing for publicity. Ava heard every word, even when people thought she couldn't. The words settled into her chest like stones. She stood behind her booth, trying to focus on her art, but suddenly the colors looked dull, her folded birds limp. Every kind compliment now felt like pity, every curious glance like judgment. Even her small crowd from the day before seemed to vanish, replaced by cautious observers who stared more at her than at her work. When a reporter asked if it was true that Alexander Monroe had sponsored the poor girl's exhibition, Ava's hands shook so badly that she dropped the paper sculpture she'd been holding. It fluttered to the floor, crushed beneath a stranger's heel. By evening, she couldn't take it anymore. She packed her art supplies quietly, fighting the tears burning behind her eyes. She had promised her community she'd make them proud, but right now, she felt like she had embarrassed everyone instead. As she stepped out of the expo hall, the cool Dubai night greeted her. The skyline shimmered, its mirrored towers reflecting a world that didn't seem to have a place for her. She sat on a stone bench overlooking the water, her sketchbook in her lap, her dreams suddenly feeling smaller than the stars above. Running away already. Ava looked up. Alexander stood a few feet away, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. He had skipped a gala dinner to find her. He didn't need to say how he knew where she'd be. "I'm not running," Ava said quietly. "I just don't belong here." He sat beside her, watching the reflections ripple across the water. "You sound like me 20 years ago," he said. "When I was your age, I pitched my first tech idea to investors who laughed in my face, said a broke college kid couldn't build something that would change the world. They told me I didn't belong either." Ava frowned. "But you proved them wrong." "I didn't," he replied. "Time did. I just kept building." The silence between them felt honest. Then Ava spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "People like me don't get seen unless we're saving someone else. The moment I stopped being the girl who helped your baby, I became a fraud." Alexander turned toward her, his expression firm but kind. "Then let's change that," he said. "Let's make sure your art is seen for what it really is. A gift, not a favor." Ava met his gaze, searching for doubt, but found none. And for the first time since the whispers began, she believed him. Above them, the city lights shimmered like promises waiting to be kept. The day of the final exhibition arrived like a sunrise after a long storm. The grand hall of the Youth Art for Change Expo gleamed beneath golden lights, its walls covered in murals, holograms, and digital masterpieces. But it was Ava's corner that drew the most curious eyes, the space that pulsed softly with sound and color, glowing with quiet energy rather than spectacle. Her installation, titled The Sound of Color, wasn't loud or grand. It breathed. Soft hues of blue and amber drifted across the curved walls as gentle chime tones rippled in response to motion. The floor was lined with textured paths, some smooth, others raised like gentle waves, inviting touch and exploration. Each part of the exhibit was designed to engage the senses in harmony, not overwhelm them. Children entered first. The noise of the crowd softened as tiny feet wandered across the textured panels. A few children with autism, guided gently by parents and therapists, began to smile, their fingers tracing the painted light. When they touched the glowing walls, the colors shifted in rhythm with their movement. The air felt alive. And then, laughter, clear, unrestrained. Lila, dressed in a yellow sundress, toddled toward the center of the installation, her curls bouncing as she giggled. Cameras followed her instinctively, the billionaire's daughter now a beacon of joy rather than distress. She pressed her small hand to one of the walls, and a symphony of soft pinks and greens bloomed outward, the light mirroring the rhythm of her touch. Other children copied her movements, turning the space into a living mural of color and sound. A hush fell over the audience. Even the critics who had come prepared with skepticism lowered their pens. Ava stood off to the side, her hands trembling, not with fear this time, but with awe. Everything she had dreamed for this project was unfolding before her eyes. Art as connection, creativity as comfort. When Alexander stepped forward, the cameras turned to him, expecting another CEO speech full of numbers and innovation. Instead, he took the microphone, his expression thoughtful. "What you see here today," he began, his voice steady but warm, "wasn't built in a lab or funded by corporate strategy. It was born from compassion, not capital." He paused, looking toward Ava. "This young woman reminded me that technology can measure the world, but only humanity can heal it. She didn't just create art, she created peace." Applause thundered through the hall. Ava's eyes filled with tears, and she looked down, humbled. Lila, hearing the sound, clapped too, her little hands joining the chorus. After the exhibition ended, the crowd didn't disperse. Reporters crowded around Ava's booth. Event directors whispered to one another, exchanging nods. When the awards were announced later that evening, the moment was almost surreal. "The Youth Art for Change Global Grant," the announcer declared, "goes to Ava Brooks of Atlanta for her groundbreaking installation, The Sound of Color, an innovation in sensory therapy through art." The audience rose to its feet. Alexander lifted Lila into his arms, smiling proudly, while Ava stood frozen for a heartbeat, the weight of every late night, every sacrifice, every prayer from her community crashing over her like a wave. When she finally stepped forward to accept the award, her voice trembled. "This isn't just mine," she said softly. "It belongs to every child who sees the world differently, and to everyone who ever believed that kindness could create change." The hall erupted again. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of a young artist bathed in color, a billionaire smiling beside her, and a baby laughing under lights shaped by compassion. For the first time, Ava wasn't saving anyone. She was seen, and the world was watching. The closing gala of the Youth Art for Change Expo shimmered with elegance. Crystal chandeliers glowed above a sea of gowns and tuxedos, but the night's true light wasn't gold. It was the quiet radiance of change. Ava stood near the edge of the grand hall, her award still tucked under one arm, her heart struggling to process the whirlwind of the past days. She wasn't used to this world. The flash of cameras, the whispers of sponsors, the kind smiles that hid corporate interest. Yet when she glanced toward the corner of the room and saw Lila playing happily in her father's arms, she remembered why she'd come here in the first place. Not for fame, not for fortune, for healing. When Alexander Monroe took the stage, the crowd hushed. The billionaire looked different tonight, not like a man presenting quarterly numbers, but like someone who had rediscovered his humanity. "I've spent my life building machines that understand," he began, his deep voice echoing across the marble hall. "But this week, a young artist reminded me that understanding without empathy means nothing." Ava blinked, startled as he gestured toward her. "Tonight, I'm proud to announce the launch of the Monroe Brooks Foundation for Sensory Healing," Alexander continued. "A global initiative dedicated to using art and science to help children with sensory disorders. And I can't imagine anyone more deserving to co-found it than the young woman who inspired it, Ava Brooks." Gasps rippled through the room, followed by applause that built like a rising tide. Ava froze for a moment, disbelief anchoring her feet to the floor. Then Alexander met her eyes and nodded gently, the same quiet encouragement he'd offered on the plane days ago. Her legs carried her forward before her mind caught up. The crowd parted as she joined him on stage, her heart thundering. When she reached the microphone, her voice came small at first, but steady. "I grew up in a neighborhood where dreams didn't travel very far," she said softly. "But my community, people who had almost nothing, taught me that compassion is the one thing you can give endlessly and still have more to share." The audience leaned in. "Art gave me a way to see the world differently," she continued. "It helped my brother, and now it's helping children I've never met. It's not about wealth or color or where you start. It's about what you're willing to give when someone needs light." The applause that followed wasn't loud at first. It was slow, deliberate, the kind that grows from something deeper than admiration. Later that night, after the music had faded and the guests had gone, Alexander found Ava sitting in a quiet corner, Lila asleep in her arms. The baby's tiny hand rested against Ava's heart, rising and falling with each breath. Alexander watched them silently, the girl who had restored his peace and the daughter who had led him to her. For the first time since his wife's passing, he felt whole again. Compassion, he realized, had rebuilt everything he thought he'd lost. The hum of the engines was the same, the sleek interior identical, but the feeling was different. Peace, soft, unbroken, and calm. The same jet that had once echoed with a baby's relentless cries now felt like a cradle in the clouds. Lila slept soundly in her bassinet, her tiny fist curled around the corner of a blanket Ava had folded herself. Each gentle breath she took was a melody of contentment, proof that some miracles weren't loud but quiet and steady. Across the aisle, Ava Brooks sat by the window, sketchbook open on her lap. She wasn't drawing for competition this time. Her lines flowed freely, shapes that looked like sound, colors that looked like peace. Every stroke was softer, surer. She glanced up once in a while, smiling faintly as Alexander watched his daughter sleep. The man who had boarded this same plane weeks ago as a weary billionaire now looked lighter, not younger but freer. Alexander leaned back, gazing out at the streaks of dawn cutting through the sky. "Funny," he said, his voice low, almost to himself. "That flight didn't just change my daughter's world. It changed mine." Ava smiled. "Maybe that's what happens when you listen instead of fix." He chuckled softly. "You sound wiser than most people twice your age." "I just see things differently," she replied, turning back to her sketchbook. "It's what art taught me." The pilot's calm voice came over the intercom, announcing clear skies and an early arrival. Flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles, smiling at the peaceful baby who had once made their job a nightmare. Ava's phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. She frowned at the unfamiliar international number, then gasped softly as she read the message. Her hand flew to her mouth. "What is it?" Alexander asked, leaning forward. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "It's from UNICEF," she said, her voice trembling. "They've endorsed the Monroe Brooks Foundation. They want to partner globally to bring sensory art therapy to children in hospitals." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander's smile spread. Slow, genuine, proud. "Looks like the world just got a little quieter, and a lot kinder." Ava laughed through her tears, shaking her head in disbelief. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You already did," he said simply. "That day on the plane." The sunlight deepened, painting the cabin in soft gold. Ava looked at the sleeping child, the content father, the endless sky ahead, and felt the same quiet certainty that had guided her when she first stood up to help a crying baby. She flipped to a blank page in her sketchbook and wrote something in small, looping letters. Not a drawing this time, but a truth. When Alexander glanced over, he read the words and smiled. It turns out, the richest man on the plane wasn't the one with billions. It was the girl who carried compassion in her hands. As the jet soared toward home, 3 souls, once strangers divided by worlds, flew together, bound by the simple miracle that had begun with a single act of kindness. Thank you for watching to the end. I believe you enjoyed it. We have a lot of other interesting stories like this lined up for you already, so click the image showing on your screen to watch the next